Greetings everyone and welcome to another Warframe build video. I'm your host, MrSpicy, as always, and today we're taking a look at Saryn, the Poison Warframe. Saryn uses her abilities to affect her enemies with both toxic and virulent damage. Saryn is overall a complex Warframe following her rework. She received an extensive focus on synergy between her abilities and is probably one of the most heavily synergistic Warframes in the game right now. So now it's time for us to dive in and see just what makes her tick. Saryn's passive, called Potency, increases all status effect durations by 25%. Her first ability, Spores, infects her enemies with toxic spores that when popped will spread to nearby enemies like a virus. At max rank without mods, you will be able to target an enemy up to 60 meters away and infect them with 3 spores. Each spore will deal 20 viral damage per second over a duration of 12 seconds. Without being popped, the 3 spores will deal 240 damage each for a total of 720 damage over the course of the 12 seconds. Popping a spore, though, will deal 25 viral damage and a 100% status chance within 16 meters to spread 3 spores to each nearby enemy. Though the damage may not seem like much, the viral status effect will reduce each enemy's current and maximum health by 50% for 7.5 seconds thanks to Saryn's passive. When a spore is popped on a target, 1 damage tick is removed from that target's damage duration. The enemies nearby are then applied their own spores with the full duration. When the spores on a secondary target are popped, they can then apply a new spore effect and duration to surrounding enemies, including enemies that have already been infected. Spore damage and burst damage will be altered by your strength mods. Ability duration, that is the amount of time for the spores to last, is affected by your duration mods. Casting range and spore spread radius are affected by range mods. It is important to note that if the original target dies, spores will continue to spread between the other enemies, but at a spread radius roughly half of the regular radius. Now there's a bonus effect if an infected enemy also carries a Toxin proc. Popping spores on enemies affected with Toxin will cause the Toxin proc to spread with the spores to nearby enemies. The Toxin status will deal 50% of the spore burst damage as Toxin damage over the course of 11 ticks in 10 seconds. You will also be able to apply multiple Toxin procs to enemies, allowing you to multiply Saryn's damage further. Taking the example on the wiki, using max rank Intensify on Saryn and a pistol with 35 base damage and a max rank Hornet Strike will increase each spore's burst damage from 25 to 68.9. Increasing this from a single Toxin proc to 10 Toxin procs on a target, the spore burst damage will further increase to 396.5. So as you can see, Spores damage can be greatly increased when tied in with Toxin damage. The augment Venom Dose allows Saryn to cast Spores on her allies, giving them 100% Toxin damage to their attacks for 40 seconds. This means that they will then be proccing Toxin on the enemies they attack, amplifying the damage of your Spores. Now let's look at Saryn's second ability, Molt. Just like a snake, Saryn can shed her skin to function as a decoy and draw enemy fire. When casting Molt, Saryn will have all existing status effects removed and the decoy will spawn at Saryn's current position, matching her pose. The Molt decoy will spawn with 400 shields and 500 health at max rank and last either 40 seconds or until its health is depleted. The decoy's shield will regenerate over time and can be buffed by shield ospreys and such. Upon timer expiration or health depletion, the decoy will explode, dealing 400 Toxin damage in a radius of 10 meters with 100% status chance. You can also recast Molt while it is already active, thereby creating a new decoy and causing the previous decoy to burst. This explosion damage does not bypass environment obstacles and does diminish over distance. So now we are starting to see ability synergies coming into play. You can cast Spores on the Molt decoy, and when doing so, will have energy cost reduced 50%. You can cast multiple instances of Spores on the decoy, and when the decoy bursts, all Spores will burst and spread to nearby enemies. Strength mods will increase the Molt's health and explosion damage, but not increase the shields. Duration mods will increase the Molt's duration, but remember it will explode if its health is depleted, so the longer duration only helps if it is not taking a lot of damage. Range mods will affect only the explosion radius. The augment Regenerative Molt causes Saryn to recover 50 health every second for 10 seconds after casting Molt. Saryn's third ability is called Toxic Lash. As the name implies, this is a toxin-focused ability which imbues your melee weapon with a toxin effect. At max rank, this will add 30% of your weapon's total damage as toxin damage with a 100% status chance for every melee strike for the duration of 30 seconds. The damage added by Toxic Lash is calculated before damage resistances are applied. In the wiki, there is an example where a weapon has 300 base damage, Toxic Lash at max rank, and a maxed Intensify applied to Saryn, which will cause an additional 117 toxin damage per strike. While Toxic Lash is active, Saryn will also have increased damage reduction of 40% due to blocking with her melee weapon. Strength mods will increase the damage bonus and damage reduction. Duration mods will of course increase the ability duration. Lastly, targets with active spores will have 1 spore burst per melee attack when Toxic Lash is active. Saryn will also have a chance to receive 2 energy for each spore burst by Toxic Lash. The augment Contagion Cloud causes enemies killed by melee attacks with Toxic Lash active to create a gas cloud that will deal toxin damage to enemies in it for 12 seconds. Saryn's final ability is called Miasma. Before her rework, Miasma was a press 4 to win ability that essentially nuked whole rooms. Miasma is where Saryn pollutes the atmosphere with a deadly mist that corrodes all enemies within range. At max rank without mods, Miasma will deal 350 corrosive damage to enemies within 15 meters over a duration of 3 seconds. Affected enemies are also briefly stunned. Miasma's damage does bypass obstacles and does not diminish with distance. Strength mods will alter the ability damage, duration mods will increase the duration meaning more damage ticks, and range mods will of course affect ability range. Now let's dig into how to amplify Miasma's damage. Miasma will deal an additional 100% damage to enemies affected by either toxin or viral status effects, and 200% additional damage to enemies affected by both. Enemies must be affected by these status effects at the time Miasma is cast. That is why when Miasma is cast within range of a Molt, the Molt decoy will explode before the first damage instance from Miasma occurs. If this Molt decoy has spores on it, the spores will also spread to nearby enemies before the first damage tick occurs for Miasma. Miasma damage will also be increased based on the percentage of the Molt's lost hit points at detonation. Okay, now it's time to take a look at my builds. For my main build, my main focus point was range. I wanted to make sure I could spread my spores as far as possible. I have added a little bit of power strength to increase the damage output from my abilities. Power duration was not a big issue on this build because most of the time I will be constantly casting spores as I move around through the mission. Because a majority of the time I will be casting my spores on the Molt decoy, I received the energy cost reduction, which means efficiency is not as necessary in this build. My second build is a modification of the first build aimed more at spamming spores as much as possible. This build sacrifices duration for much greater efficiencies to allow you to cast spores non-stop. Now let's talk weapon choices. A popular weapon choice is the Zenistar, where you place the disc next to your Molt and continuously cast spores on it. The Zenistar disc will pop the spores on Molt, thereby constantly spreading spores across the area. If you're going to be focusing on the Toxic Lash ability, then high damage weapons will benefit most. If you do not want to worry about using Toxic Lash, then tying in with toxin weapons such as Acrid, Embolus, Lesion, and so forth will let you maintain the toxin proc damage increase. When it comes to Warframe synergies, a buff build Rhino focusing on Roar is a great synergy with Saryn's Spore ability. Because Roar affects all your damage output, your spores will increase even if they have already been cast. A slow build Nova is also a very good synergy with Saryn because of Molecular Prime. However, any team build with maxed corrosive projection on each Warframe will allow for your enemies to be completely stripped of their armor and have their health cut in half by your Spore ability. In the end, Saryn is a very fun Warframe to play and very useful in a team mechanic if you know how to utilize her. Before her rework, Saryn was mostly seen as a high damage output frame. Following her rework, Saryn is still a high damage Warframe. However, her team mechanic has shifted more to being a support role. The use of her abilities to spread viral and toxin procs across the battlefield helps to reduce even higher level enemies to dust. Well, that's it for today's build video. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, be sure to hit that like button. Also, make sure you hit subscribe and tick the notification bell if you have not already done so. Leave me a comment below. Let me know what you think about my builds, if you have any suggestions for my builds, or if you would like to share your own build with the community. Once again, everyone, I'm your host, Mr. Spicy. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.